Meet Alex, a driven young professional in a big city, dealing with tight deadlines, early morning meetings, and a demanding job. When Alex was told to take a month-long business trip out of state, the strategy was easy. Sublease the apartment for a month, earn some extra money, and come home to regular life. What could go wrong? Before departing, Alex discovered a seemingly trustworthy subletter on the internet. Casey, neat profile, courteous messages, a prompt video call, all seemed to check out, or so it went. With confidence, Alex gave over the keys, signed a simple rental contract, and flew out for work, never thinking the choice would spin into chaos. While Alex was gone, Casey was quiet. No warning signs, no complaints. But things were shifting, gradually, subtly. Casey wasn't merely sleeping over. Casey was moving in, rearranging furniture, repainting walls, changing locks, redecorating. And when Alex's vacation finally came to an end and they returned home, they would know. Their apartment no longer belonged to them. Alex came home tired but relieved, suitcase in hand, eager to collapse in the security of their own place. But when they did, something was amiss. The key, once a flawless fit, no longer fit the lock. Bewildered, Alex double-checked the digit on the door. It was correct. But the lock altered. A few raps, and the door swung open. There was Casey, dressed down, clutching a coffee cup, with the relaxed face of someone who fit in. Behind them, the apartment was transformed. Gone were the clean lines and pale colors. Instead, there were vibrant art pieces, second-hand furniture, greenery, and mess. Alex blinked, amazed. Casey smiled. "Welcome back," they said, as if everything was fine. Alex went inside, staring around the familiar yet suddenly strange room. "Casey, what's up? You were to stay just for a bit." Casey smiled. "Well, I really got set up. It just began feeling like home, you know? So, I figured, why not?" As Alex lingered, attempting to make sense of the dreamlike encounter, it became apparent. This was no misunderstanding. This was a takeover, and retrieving their life would not be as easy as it was to say, "Please leave." Alex stood in the middle of what once was their home, her heart pounding. The walls, once bare and empty, were now hung with tapestries and mismatched paintings. Shelves were stacked with books Alex had never opened, boxes they'd never packed. The couch had been replaced. Even the lighting was different. It was like entering someone else's memory, one that had been rewritten without her permission. But this wasn't merely about furniture or looks. It was about space, ownership, identity, and Alex understood that something far more profound had been stolen. Alex attempted reason first, calmly. "Casey, I'm home. I reside here. You were a guest tenant, and your month's over." But Casey stood against the kitchen counter as if they'd paid the mortgage for decades. "But you weren't here. You left. I kept things going. I made it better. I even updated the lease address on my mail. Doesn't that count for something?" It didn't. Not in law. But Casey wasn't operating in law. They were operating in emotion. Entitlement masquerading as reason. Self-assurance substituting for permission. When reason failed, Alex went on to the next step, documents. They came up with the original contract, which specified clearly the time limit, the short-term nature of the sublet, the return date. Nevertheless, Casey shrugged. "That's just paper," they stated. "I live here now." What ensued were late, exhausting days spent on phone calls, forms, and glacial bureaucracy. Property managers said their hands were tied without a proper eviction notice. Lawyers, costly. Police, worthless. They called it a civil issue. Alex started sleeping at a friend's apartment amidst clothes in bags and a toothbrush in a cup. The apartment they rented, lost. Each evening they asked themselves, how had it come to this? But Alex wasn't about to let it go. They recorded everything. The text messages, the terms of the lease, pictures of the changed apartment, receipts, emails. They made a formal complaint, and at last, after weeks of going back and forth, they received a court date. Casey mysteriously arrived at court dressed as informally as they were in the apartment. Confident, even happy. They issued vague threats of being invited and accused Alex of abandoning the apartment. But the judge wasn't impressed. The deal was a deal. The intention was for a while. The tenant was a squatter. The mandate was given. Casey needed to leave in 7 days. Returning to the apartment a week later, over time Alex renovated the apartment, not to its former state, but to something else. A mix of old familiarity and new beginnings. They retained something Casey had left behind, a broken ceramic mug in the kitchen. A reminder, because this was not so much a tale of a horrible tenant, it was an admonishment. In a world where boundaries between personal space and temporary alliances are increasingly blurred, the ones we count on can be silently erased. And sometimes the most difficult doors to open are the ones we believed were ours to begin with. Weeks went by. The apartment came back to Alex gradually, but the sense of desecration lingered in the shadows, like a dark presence in the corners. The locks were replaced, the walls painted over, and Casey's mark erased one object at a time. But recovery wasn't about looks. It was about recovery of a sense of mastery, a space to breathe, to be home. Friends checked in often. Some were shocked. Others offered help. But most of them asked the same thing. How could this even happen? Alex had no easy answer, because the truth was simple. Trust, once broken, isn't easy to restore. And sometimes it takes losing your own space to understand how precious it truly is. Alex now keeps the lease under lock and key. The door is closed. The lesson? Even the best of intentions can open the wrong door. Even the most responsible professional individuals can be taken by surprise. Because home isn't just where you live, it's where your life lives. And if you don't defend it, someone else just might move in. Time went on, but not fast. For Alex, recovery wasn't one great leap forward. It came in pieces, in the stillness of pre-dawn mornings, in the turn of keys and locks that opened correctly, in the methodical unpacking of boxes that had not been touched since the nightmare started. The apartment was the same address, same square footage, same windows admitting the city's far-off hum. But it was also completely different. Every corner seemed to have to be re-earned. Every room was filled with the echoes of something unwanted. It wasn't about evicting Casey. It was about reclaiming the sense of self that had quietly been stolen. One rug, one repainted wall at a time. Alex started sleeping better, gradually, initially with lights, then with a slightly open door. Later on, they fell back into their habit. Coffee from the same chipped cup, music streaming from the same speaker, emails replied from the same desk. But everything, seemed that little bit more breakable. And then there was the paperwork, weeks of legal cleanup, notices, receipts, photographs, sworn declarations. Casey naturally vanished like mist. No apology, no explanation, gone, as if they'd never existed. But Alex knew better. Absence doesn't erase presence, it just makes it more difficult to trace. Friends continued to ask, "Why didn't you notice the red flags?" Alex asked themselves the same. But hindsight is a cruel friend. It always has the loudest voice after the harm is already done. The thing was, Casey didn't appear threatening. Nobody ever does initially. They were courteous, intelligent, serene. They emitted the flawless impression of steadiness, the type of person you believe you can trust. And that is the most frightening aspect. This was not a tale of a mistake. It was one of boundaries. The kind you create, the kind people disregard, and the kind that can be crossed without ever having to raise your voice. In the subsequent weeks, Alex began speaking up, not loudly but firmly. Online forums, tenant advocacy groups, hushed discussions at cafes with friends contemplating renting out their properties. They told their story, not with bitterness, but with something deeper, the imperative to shield others from the same unseen incursion, to put form to something people don't always think is real until it happens to them. They referred to it as gray space theft, not really illegal until it is, not really criminal until the judge decides so. And by that time, it's too late, because your space, your routine, your safety, it's already been disturbed. And so Alex transformed, not necessarily their locks or their furnishings, but their thinking. They became fastidious, vigilant, but not paranoid, just ready. The city hadn't changed. It still pulsed with intensity and noise. Strangers continued to pass down the hallway, offering polite nods. But Alex was different, and that meant more. On a rainy night, Alex stood at the apartment window, seeing water speed down the glass in drunken rivers. Lights inside were dim, walls stripped again, on purpose. Clean, quiet. For the first time in months, they felt an odd peace.